Hello and welcome from me, Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson to the special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Many thanks again for joining us to the latest in our series of special interviews with industry leaders during this COVID-19 crisis. Following recent conversations with Sytner Group CEO Darren Edwards, Virtue Motors CEO Robert Forrester, IMDA's chairman Umesh Samani and ASE's chairman Mike Jones. All of these will still be available to stream online from motortraderadio.com, Spotify and Apple and Google Podcasts.
So our special guest today is Nathan Tomlinson, dealer principal and owner of the multi-award-winning Devonshire Motors, the Barnstaple-based Mitsubishi dealership. Welcome to the podcast, Nathan.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, first time.
Very much so, yeah. Thank you.
So, a lot going on, isn't there?
There most certainly is, yeah. Where do we begin?
Well, that's it. I mean, it's a pleasure, I say, to have you on board. And just to start off by giving us a little bit of background on you and your business and take us through some of the situation you found yourself in when we sort of went into the lockdown stage.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we're a Mitsubishi dealer in Barnstaple, North Devon. Over 30 years as a Mitsubishi dealer. Single site operation, but our business model packs a pretty decent punch, typically around 6 to 10% market share with Mitsubishi, overhead absorption of over 100%. Under normal circumstances, it's a really strong model, and of course being small means we're nimble. Did we feel nimble the last couple of weeks? Not really, no. Closing down the showroom was quite a straightforward task. After sales proved a little more tricky because mainly customers and staff, the range of responses we had was completely different. Some people acting like nothing was happening and others literally almost fearing for their lives. And that's probably been the hardest part of the last couple of weeks, just balancing that complete spectrum of human response. Kind of like politics and religion. The coronavirus has taken a position alongside those two in terms of, really eliciting such emotional responses from people and also such different responses from people. So we've kind of moved through the same processes that everybody else has in terms of closing the showroom, thinking we were going to stay open in after sales, then realising we weren't. But the hard part all the way through has been communicating clearly, and that's something that we've found really, really difficult.
So, Nathan, what's the status now with the business? For instance, how many staff are on furlough? You mentioned just then about you thought about keeping after sales open, but you haven't. Who's manning the phones and who's responding to internet inquiries at the site?
So it was more a case of we hoped initially that we'd be able to keep some after-sales momentum going, and it very quickly became apparent that we couldn't. Number one, in order to protect staff and customers, of course, but number two, just because the practicality of safe working practice with any number of people is really, really difficult. Across the business, we've got quite a large body shop operation that kind of mirrors the size of the dealership. We've got about 55 employees in total, and we've got 19 that are currently active, so everybody else furloughed. Now, probably 2 years ago, we changed our admin structure, moving away from kind of typical sales and service admin to a sort of centralized structure where we've got a core of people that deal with almost everything that's non-skill specific, so phone calls, emails, web lead first responses, basic invoicing, sales orders, all the kind of CRM stuff that doesn't require that ultra specific skill set that either a salesperson's got or a service advisor or a technician. So by keeping 2 or 3 of those people active rather than furloughed, we've actually got a really good, strong core of people that are able to manage any kind of incoming inquiry to the website and deal with it to a point. Beyond that, then we've got 3 technicians, our after-sales manager and a service advisor who are also active. And at the moment, they're a kind of working from home scramble team. And they've been in half a dozen times to do NHS critical work, vets. They've changed brake pads, tyres, dealt with oil leaks, all the kind of things that crop up regularly in normal day-to-day and seem like kind of run-of-the-mill stuff. But actually, when it's frontline specific, becomes quite, important.
And just following up on one of the points you made there, Nathan, in terms of incoming inquiries, what sort of level are you getting at the moment, and have you had over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, so initially it was really quite interesting because, that scramble to close the business, it's really non-specific. So you kind of think of the obvious things. You draw all the obvious processes to a close. Seems quite straightforward. And then, to use Robert Forrester's phrase from one of your previous podcasts, you go home and have your tea, and you realise that service reminders are still going out, or a marketing initiative you set up a month ago is due to go out in 3 days' time.
Yeah.
So we had to change quite a lot of our communication, our outgoing automated communication, so that it made sense. What that did was allowed us to communicate quite clearly with customers more and more as time went on. So initially we saw a lot of inquiries. What about MOT? What about the service I've got booked next week? All those typical customer questions. But as more and more of our automated materials went out and we updated a very specific page on our website, the information we were sending became more and more consistent, and those type of inquiries died away. So what we're kind of left with now is the genuine, urgent repair, frontline worker style inquiries, and or sales inquiries, which we're managing by rapport building and continuing conversations just as we normally would.
So in terms of, we were talking before the show, and we're talking about obviously this sort of home working, remote working. What's a typical day now for you at the minute as a business? Because like you said right at the start, even though you're a single site, you do punch very heavy, don't you, in terms of what you do. So what's a typical day now for you in your business?
Well, I normally get up around 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Have a bit of lunch, watch some afternoon telly. Yeah. G&T start about 4, do they? Yeah.
Well, joking aside, I try to keep it as consistent with a normal day at work as possible. So I'm up at, like many of us are in this industry, 5:30, 6 o'clock. And what I try to do, for me personally, I'll be working on some project or something for the business that I try to do ahead of the day-to-day stuff that comes in around 8, 9, 10 o'clock when everybody else starts working. So at the moment, it's refining our website so that we've got, we were talking earlier about, it's not so much buy online, it's rapport build online. So I'll work on those kind of things in the morning, and then during the day, as conversations pick up between staff members and customers, then it'll be a mix of calls, response coaching, and then just generally trying to second guess what's going to happen next and have a plan in place for it. And then from that, trying to feed that down subtly to our team, because one thing that I've been guilty of, and can happen very easily at the moment, is you make a decision and then 30 seconds later you've got to try to explain to half a dozen people why you're trying to reverse it and almost do completely the opposite. So, some subtle communication during the day is also very important.
Now, Nathan, over the last couple of weeks, we've heard from the bosses of Virtue and Sitner about how they went into lockdown. So I'm kind of interested on what the ramifications of the lockdown were for you as a Solus site, especially in terms of cash flow, because that's the common denominator, isn't it? It doesn't matter how big or small the business is. And also, have suppliers been receptive to things like deferred payments?
So something that's quite interesting for us there is that we're on 90-day terms with insurance companies in the body shop. So actually, we've still got some money coming in. That's probably quite unique to us, and it will obviously create an equal problem the other side, because we'll be waiting that same period of time. The thing that I think is important to perhaps keep in mind with cash flow and suppliers is you've got to be mindful and have some empathy, because they're in a very similar position to us. So in fact, we've actually brought forward some supplier payments where they're small companies, or, all of us work with great people. And the last thing that we want on the other side of this is to have broken a relationship, or, I've heard a lot of dealers stopping, direct debits for the coffee machine, the music on hold, all those systems, the websites. It won't go on. This won't go on forever. And at the end of the day, £200, £500, £700 a month payments aren't going to be what make or break a business. It's the big costs, and of course, cash flow is a massive concern. And initially, for the most part, for us anyway, that's because furloughed or not, until that HMRC portal's up and running, we're still paying wages. And the key factor there is how big is your wage bill? How long have you got to pay it for before you're likely to get some of it back? And do we really know exactly how much of it we're going to get back? And it's making those decisions for the right reasons in the meantime. And the right reasons is really key for that, because if you think about a scenario where this only lasts for a month against one that lasts for 6 months, you're going to make a very different decision. So you can easily look at, most businesses will be able to look after everybody the way they'd want to for a month or two. And that's going to be completely different if this goes on for 6 or 12 months, of course. So it's about making a balanced decision. You can't just switch everything off and kind of hope for the best.
Yeah, it's that impact into, like you say, on the supply chain of things as well. Those, because these guys, they are, small businesses that if everybody did it, then you've got a risk of those guys going into liquidation, and then when you do get up and running again, then you haven't got that supplier because of the ramifications of cancelling direct debits. But again, as you say there, between that balance of doing the right thing, but actually having a business in the long term for people to come back to, it's a tough balance to manage that one, isn't it?
I think if there's one thing I'd like to see the other side of this, it's that we come out of it more or less the same as we went in. So we've all got pain and we've all got concerns, but at the end of the day, I think anybody would say I'd rather be back to where I was with the problems I had, a month or 2 months ago, i.e. missing my Q1 target, 20 cars over 90 days, whatever your problems were before, you kind of want to come out the same the other side. And if you've burnt all these suppliers, and the other thing is, of course, employee goodwill. The day we restart normality, or whatever that period of transition is, we're going to be depending so heavily on people, our own people, to work extra hours perhaps, to work harder, to work faster. And if you've burnt that goodwill over the period of a month or two, just through trying to protect cash flow, which of course is critical, but you're making, again, it's got to be that balanced decision, otherwise you're going to burn the goodwill that you need to recover from this. So it's the short term, but it's also the long term.
Definitely. And on that note, in terms of the OEMs manufacturer, and you're obviously with Mitsubishi, how are they supporting? Because I've heard, in terms of conversations that there's a lot of, we referred to it on Darren Edwards' interview with the WhatsApp group between that sort of the manufacturer started, OEM started, and then it got took over by sort of the CEOs and business heads. But how are Mitsubishi throughout this process with yourself? Because you obviously do operate very closely with them as a as an OEM.
Yeah, and have done for a long time. But with Mitsubishi, you've got to remember that they're an importer. So almost like a big dealer group head office in many ways, and they have their own business to balance too. But with that said, they've put together a suite of solid support measures, as have many other manufacturers. But I think for me, it's a little bit bigger than Mitsubishi and us. The scale and effect of what's going on at the moment, I think, requires more of a collaborative approach. One of the things I've noticed quite a lot is that, dealers will phone each other, and then manufacturers will phone dealers, and there's a lot of conversation about, what's person A doing, what's person B doing, what do you think we should do? And actually, going back to that WhatsApp group you've mentioned, that's the way I think we need to be approaching the current situation. Don't think we should be getting too excited about quarter two targets until we've figured out whether we're going to be in quarter two or not. So for me, it comes down to putting together, the key players in this: manufacturers, lenders, the group CEOs, and then also, the likes of the IMDA, the NFDA, and get a broad representation to put something a little bit more across the board in place, rather than, playing person A off against person B, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, Nathan, you won't need reminding that the lockdown happened during the worst possible month for dealers. So just on a sort of practical level, how did you go about facilitating new orders that were already in the pipeline? And also, what have you done with part exchanges that you took during the first half and 3/4 of the month?
So we've got 3 new cars that we haven't been able to hand over, and so when you finish laughing about that, it's not because we only sold 5.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Your fault for the 44% drop in March, then, is it?
Our Q1 focus has always been the same, and that's work mid-February towards a first week of March handover, because it's always been an issue in the industry in terms of selling cars and handing them over quickly. So we've always worked towards that with our marketing, with our events. Our entire, structure is geared up to making sure we sell or take orders in February for March plate, but then we get those vehicles out in as many days as it takes to load the showroom and get them all out quickly. So typically, we haven't had too much hangover to deal with. We had a really good March, really strong March. In fact, I think we were something in the region of 17% market share. Wow. For a manufacturer that's got, less than 1% nationally. So for us, that hasn't been so much of a big deal. In terms of the used part exchanges, we were cautious anyway because we had a lot of stock around us. But with that said, it was nice to see the commentary from CAP, and also our online activity. There certainly doesn't seem to be any need for dealers to erode used car pricing. No reason at all. I think the trade might feel differently in terms of anybody that's got to liquidate stock. But with that said, there is no way to liquidate stock at the moment anyway, so it's almost an irrelevant point.
No, very true. I mean, it's that when there's transactions not taking place in any scale, then, like you say, it shouldn't really affect anything. It's going to be
there's almost no barometer for it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our customer inquiries, where we have had inquiries, they haven't been price led in any way. They've just been for need or interest. As I say, I think it would be different if auction sites were open and dealers were looking at their stock in a traditional way and saying, okay, it's coming up to 60 days or 90 days, so I'm going to have to dispose of it. I think that would be different, but as you say, it's not. So
yeah, I mean, that's going to be the challenge when restrictions are lifted and everything, whenever does start to come back out at the other end, is the balance between maintaining those pricing in line with the market, but actually balancing that against those in a need of cash and trying to maintain that equilibrium between the two, because it's going to be a tough one, because some businesses will be in a worse state in terms of cash flow than others, won't they?
Of course.
And that's where it starts. Not just dealers, you're talking vendors, lease, contract hire, etc. That's totally different, but interesting. And in terms of, you mentioned it before about collaboration, and you've got two kind of social media messages, themes running at the minute. One is obviously around the staying safe and keeping everyone safe and well, and the second one is obviously around the collaboration, dealers, OEMs, finance houses, suppliers. And you just talk us through what you why you set that up that way, and what you are messaging there, if it's not too obvious.
In terms of the collaboration, kind of just what we touched on before, I just think, from my experience and from the dealers I've been talking to in the last couple of weeks, and that's from a scale of kind of owner, driver, single site to perhaps dealers with small groups, and many of them sharing exactly the same concerns, always the same questions, and it's the same 3 or 4 questions, every time. And the big groups and some of the manufacturers got a better grasp of how to deal with these things. And I think the situation dictates being a little bit more serious than perhaps we initially thought it was going to be 3 weeks ago. I think the situation dictates a kind of a bigger picture approach to supporting and helping each other. We've mentioned the IMDA and the NFDA, great organisations, but they don't pull individuals together enough at times like this. And I think there's a lot of information around that would be better digested and kind of recycled into a more dealer-friendly terminology, because a lot of dealers have grown up just doing what they know best, selling cars, the basics. And when it comes to critical business management, they don't have the resource, they don't have the the people to lean on. It's hard for some people to know which way to turn.
Yeah, because they've just been working in their little silo, haven't they, in their area, and some of them, I know it from speaking to a lot of these independent guys, that they don't know what's happening out there, because they're just getting on with their daily job that they need to do, whether that's looking after the customer, selling a car, or going out sourcing cars and looking after the website. They're kind of cocooned a little bit from the wider market, aren't they, in many ways.
And being in your bubble can be very successful, but when things around you dynamically change, then it's hard to know who to turn to for clear advice and guidance. And there's plenty of good sources out there, don't get me wrong, but not everybody's connected to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, following up on that point, Nathan, I mean, clearly you're talking to a lot of dealers, be they local or national. I don't know if you're talking to any independents at the moment, but how would you describe the mood amongst other dealers is at the moment?
If you'd have asked me this a week ago, I would have said utter panic, because, for everybody, it was a case of how do we deal with the immediate cash flow issue that's going to be right around the corner. But actually, I think it's kind of changing now to many people understanding that it's not quite as bad as it seemed in terms of there is a lot of government support available. Some of it now is becoming more factual, because initially there wasn't enough guidance available for people to feel comfortable, but there is now. Yeah. So I think it's calmed down a lot, but it's difficult for most dealers. I think it's fair to say it's difficult for most dealers to separate fact from opinion. And I think that's interesting because, if you look, if you were to be able to jump in a time machine and go back 50 years, when your newspaper came once a week, you lived and died by the headline, and it was the gospel. The problem is now we've all got so many different variations on what we perceive to be news, and it can be very easy for somebody's opinion to look like fact. So I think that's a really important takeaway point. We really need to find a method to clearly communicate across the industry a kind of best practice plan for shutdown first, for HR, for survival, and then to thrive the other side of it. I think that's something together.
Yeah, and during this process, have you found social media useful?
That's a double-edged question.
I'm thinking more in terms of. I'm thinking in terms of, say, LinkedIn, where a lot of dealers are on LinkedIn, and I'm certainly seeing a lot of best practices, and indeed, if they're doing anything for key workers, they're putting postings on. So, is there anything in there that's actually been useful?
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely, very much so. I think our industry in particular is a big fan of shared best practice, isn't it? Nobody really does anything particularly original. You either do it better or worse than the person next to you. So social media and those good news stories are certainly very, very useful. I wouldn't say anything to the contrary.
No.
But what it can do sometimes is make it can make people feel left out a little bit, because some dealers are better at communicating in that way than others. So I think that's important to be mindful of.
Yeah. And I mean, we've touched on it before about the you mentioned it around the cap values and the fact that they took a pragmatic view of freezing them when obviously there was no transactions. Is that kind of the feeling that you're hearing from across the network? Are they quite, what's the view from dealers in terms of values, or does it depend on, again, what we touched on earlier around that importance of cash flow and survival, or does it, is there a common theme across the market that you're hearing?
Yeah, I think Mike Jones was very clear on the fact that there's only going to be one solution to used car stock, and it's not going to be liquidation, it's going to be retail. And I think that's probably for all when you're not trading at all, you've got none of those barometers that you usually have. So you don't look at trade values, you're not buying and selling. So all that's kind of disappeared. And I think for dealers, the most important factor to focus on at the moment isn't the value of your stock, is it declining or not. It's about having a plan in place to get it either quickly prepared or efficiently prepared, because this will end at some point. And when it does, the difference will be those dealers that are ready to act quickly and those that are kind of like wondering what to do next. So I think more than to focus on the value, it's a case of focus on the plan you've got in place or can put in place to recover as quickly as possible. And again, that's something we're always doing and battling in the industry, getting those used cars prepared and to forecourt or internet as quickly as possible.
And Nathan, to finish off with, how do you think car retailing will change once the lockdown is lifted? What sort of long-lasting changes and ramifications do you foresee?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing that interests me is that fundamentally over all the years we've been doing this, it hasn't really changed much at all. I mean, the internet came and went. Well, it didn't go, did it? But, the fuss over the internet, disruptors in the industry. We almost every month in this industry, we deal with an almost drastic business changing scenario, but actually doesn't change much at all. I think the interesting thing with this is it will introduce people to online that wouldn't have otherwise been introduced to online. So taking us for an example, if you were to come in and buy a car from us, you'll probably see the same salesperson that you saw for your last 3 or 4 purchases, and you're familiar, you're comfortable, you're not looking for a change in that experience. But being forced to take your buying process online and then finding out that actually it's the same person, and he's just as entertaining electronically as he is in person, and then perhaps further down the line he's going to come out to you with the car as well. That person that wouldn't have otherwise looked to online is now going to realise that actually online is better. So I think fundamentally that will change the way consumers look at online retailing through dealerships. Equally, I think for salespeople that typically would see online inquiries as almost an out-of-hours chore, they're going to start to understand through experience that it's actually not quite as onerous as it appears. It's 5 or 10 minutes on your smartphone, and actually it's quite satisfying, because there's nothing worse for a sales executive than phoning somebody 3 to 5 times a day and getting hung up on because it's an inconvenient time and somehow that doesn't register. Whereas when the guy contacts you at 9 o'clock at night, he couldn't be happier that you've responded to him, and the conversation is completely different. So I think it'll be a game changer for online, and I think it needs to be, but I think it'll be for the good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, all it needs to say now is many thanks for taking the time out and joining us today, Nathan. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for sharing your experiences and obviously insights with us and our listeners. So it only leaves me to say that, wish you and the team of Devonshire Motors all the best through these difficult and unprecedented, for the overused word, times that we find ourselves in, and fingers crossed that we'll return to some kind of new normality soon enough, and you can get back to doing what you do best, really. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Nathan.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope you found it interesting.
Yeah, many thanks, Nathan. Thanks for joining us there. So that's all for now. You've been listening to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Please like and share on social media, as it's important during these times, as Nathan pointed out, for the dealer community to actually come together and share their experiences. So Philip and I will be back with the industry headlines on Saturday, but do watch out for more special podcast interviews as we work through this crisis. Thank you for tuning in, and stay safe.